Now that the dust is settled and your negotiations are done, and that were long and hard, in some sense, is the sense of accomplishment more because the GST was being seen as the hallmark of reforms? Everything that you did was being judged whether you can or cannot pass the GST.
Well, I think it's a very critical step forward as far as the country is concerned. And not only from the point of view of indirect taxation structure in the country, but the fact that it has been passed unanimously also demonstrates in a major way India's collective desire to reform and grow. At the present stage, where the global economy is in a serious challenge, where demand world over is low, countries are still struggling to come out with new instruments of how to revive their own economies. If India is to continue to be, at least in the growth rates, a global leader, some questions almost became synonymous with the pace and desire of reforms. And I think the GST was one of them.
But now that it is done, do you believe you can make the audacious attempt at aiming at 10% in this term of your government?
Well, I still feel that you have very high growth rates possible when the global winds are in support. When the global winds are obstructive, trade shrinks, commodity prices are low, then to reach very high rates of growth is extremely challenging. India, of course, did manage 7.2 and 7.6% in the last 2 years despite a bad monsoon.
That's right, yeah.
Hopefully we should improve on that if the monsoons look to be much better.
Right.
And I think a lot would depend on how the global environment is.
In this some sense of accomplishment, and I think you deserve credit for bringing about that consensus, and because of the paucity of time, I'm not going to allude to how you brought about that consensus and broke through political lines. In that sense of accomplishment, is there also this sense of a daunting task that lies ahead? A lot more needs to be done to meet that deadline.
I think both the points that you make are significant. The bringing about of consensus was based on the fact that you had a large number of NDA governments in the country, so most states were on board.
That's right.
You had several states with regional parties, except for some reservations of the AIDMK. All the other political parties, particularly the one which controlled the state governments,
that's right,
were overwhelmingly in support. Now, they belong to regions which were essentially consuming states, and they felt that they needed more revenues, and as consuming states, GST was a better proposition for them. So between the NDA states and the regional parties, you had an adequate number of states on your side. Congress conventionally was always in favor of the GST. It had in between raised some issues, and I think we adopted the proper and correct course of negotiating with them, accommodating some of their concerns, convincing them of our viewpoint in relation to some others, and I'm glad the way it ended in the upper house. Now it goes to the lower house, and hopefully things should work out well. Now, as far as the deadline is concerned, it's a very challenging deadline for the reason that now it has to be approved by the Lok Sabha, then by the state assemblies.
That's right.
That, I think, is the easier part. Thereafter, all the procedural modalities will have to be done, starting with the two laws to be approved by Indian Parliament and one law to be approved by all the state assemblies. That is going to be a time-consuming process, and you are going to be cutting it very fine thereafter. Subsequently, you'll also have to have all the functional modalities worked out between the center and the state, so that the same assessee is not assessed by two different authorities. Then the very purpose of GST itself would be defeated.
Exactly.
So where do you divide the cutoffs? And that's a legitimate view. Some of the states have said that we must have clear jurisdictions defined.
The reason why I'm asking that question, sir, is that a lot of what needs to be done hereafter, whether it's rate, whether it's threshold, whether it's dual control, lies in the realm of the GST Council, where decisions are going to be far more political than technical, if I may, and that may delay things. If things get delayed, do you plan to introduce the GST mid-year if need be, say the 1st of October?
Well, theoretically, not being an income tax law, it can be.
Right.
That's possible. It's a transactional tax. Theoretically, that is possible. But I think our current effort has to be that so far the empowered committee has good leadership. It has functioned well. And once it converts itself into a GST council, with the central government also as a member, though even today we coordinate with them,
right, yes.
I think things should become better. And I must say, to the credit of the empowered committee, it has not allowed itself to be divided on political lines at all.
They say to your credit that you've been far more conciliatory in your tone than the previous finance ministers have been, so I think that's a compliment as well.
Well, I think in the GST council, as in the empowered committee, states are also concerned about their own interests.
That's right, yeah.
Not about the political positions that their parties are taking.
True. But sir, I want to compliment you on being benevolent by deciding to devolve 42% of the central taxes and sharing them with the states. As far as the Finance Commission's report is concerned, you've also committed yourself to fully compensate for the first 5 years. But having said that, because cess and surcharges will now be subsumed by the GST and states will get a higher share in any case by that 42% devolution, do you believe they are now justified in harping on a higher rate for the GST?
Well, I think the rate has to be a fair rate. The rate has to be an optimum rate. What is a fair and optimum rate is really a matter of specific calculations.
That's right.
It has to be guided by the two principles. The first being that between the present situation and the post-GST situation, the rate must significantly come down. It can come down because of operational efficiencies and doing away with evasion and so on. It can come down because of the cascading effect of multiple taxation itself. It can come down because some of the items itself will be low rated items. And once the rate comes down, that rate should be enough for both the central government and the state governments to meet their expenditure requirements and their developmental needs. So you will have to balance between the two factors.
Are you in a bind of sorts? Because states would want higher rates, but politically speaking, you would want rates to be at least viably low as possible.
And that is why I think let's not speak in terms of high or low. It certainly will be lower than the present manufacturing.
And that's very high, yes.
That present situation is very high. The services tax could marginally go up because you are at about a 15% level at the moment. And once it converges, it may move up. That's for the council to decide.
Right.
But it should be enough that the states have adequate money for developmental activities. After all, development is also in larger public interest.
So let me ask you a number. Is 18% viable, and anything more than that could perhaps be inflationary?
But I think it's not fair for me to comment at this stage. I don't want to preempt the options before the GST Council itself. You have state governments which are speaking in terms of a higher figure. You have the chief economic advisor who's been strongly advocating a particular figure and giving all the arguments in that favor. But let's be clear, the chief economic advisor's own committee, his figure is between 16.9 to 18.9.
And there are different flags, yes.
Can be approximately for a standard rate, if it's taken as 19, then there are two more additions to that which have to take place, because his is based on the 2013-14.
Exactly, and there are more cesses that have come in.
And there are more cesses which have come. And the central government taxes will also have to take into consideration the quantum of compensation to be paid effectively.
Exactly. Because you spoke about compensation, I think you've been benevolent. I think one of the reasons why states have come on board is because you've committed yourself. Do you believe that money needs to come in from the collection that was made for the GST, or do you believe, like a lot of commentators are saying, let the fist expand a little? Why should you take the burden?
Well, you have a parallel exercise of the FRBM which has been going on. And I think let us wait. We still have some time to decide this, and therefore let's wait for that recommendation also.
Sir, given the perhaps short-term inflationary impact of the GST, there are some suggestions out there being made that there could be a separate rate for goods and for services. Does that cut ice with you?
Well, I've been reading about this. I've been reading about these suggestions.
But doesn't that violate the principle of a uniform?
It could, but you see, the factor would be, it will also depend on whatever is the eventual standard rate which is fixed.
That's right.
And ordinarily you expect the goods and services tax to converge into one figure. And that is one of the reasons why the UPA government raised service tax from 10 to 12, and subsequently I raised it from 12 to 14.
That's right.
One of the ideas was that it should start converging towards
the GST rate.
The GST rate.
Sir, I know that you're a very pragmatic politician, and whatever you do, you are going to keep the common man in your sight, because those are the guys who are going to go out there and vote. There is this talk about an anti-profiteering clause that could perhaps cushion the burden a little.
I think these are all media speculations at the moment, and therefore in a larger perspective, I feel that if the GST is not inflationary, if it helps in bringing down tax rates, particularly as far as manufacturing is concerned, if the GST overall helps the Indian economy to grow faster, there couldn't be anything better for the Indian economy and the common man.
Oh, absolutely. And people are calling it the red letter event in the Indian economy. There is some concern about dual control. I know you are not of the view that there should be too many areas of dual control. But what is the threshold that's acceptable to you?
You see, it's not a threshold acceptable to me. It's a matter. You see, today you have the Central Excise Department. You have the Taxation Department in various states. So to make sure that they get subsumed into the GST itself, a clear functional arrangement has to be made between the two. And I think this is a matter more than the ministers for the officers and the technical experts to sort out.
At what stage, sir, do you realistically think, I mean, best should not be the enemy of good, and I think we made a very good beginning with the GST, but at what stage do you envisage a better or a perfect GST? When can petrol be brought into the ambit of the GST? We've taken 10 years to get here.
Well, I think if the experiment of GST succeeds, and the states also find that it's beneficial to them, just as VAT was beneficial to them, I think we'll only take that steps when the states are on board. After all, to desire something without the states being on board is not fair. If we had insisted on rating petrol at the moment or bringing in alcohol into it,
you have to take them into consideration.
Then probably we wouldn't have had the decisions we've had so far.
And which is why they say you've been far more benevolent than most of your other predecessors. But what held you back? And this is a more political question that I'm asking you. There was a heated exchange towards the end, even though the GST was passed unanimously. What held you back from making that commitment of not bringing it as a financial bill?
Well,
that debate settled
the first draft of that bill is not before me. I don't know what the bill is going to be about, what the GST Council will prepare, because this bill has to be prepared by the Council, given to me. We have to approve it and finally get it approved by Parliament. How can I make a commitment about a bill whose draft I have not seen? And therefore, in any case, it's a question of who has jurisdiction. Both houses are only essentially, predominantly one house, because Rajya Sabha also discusses financial bills itself. But then these are constitutional issues which can only be decided after seeing the copy of the bill.
But do you believe, because the Lok Sabha Speaker is going to decide, in some sense the opposition's demand is not justified?
Well, I'm not making any comment on the opposition's demand, because whether it's a money bill, a financial bill or an ordinary bill, it will depend on what is the content of that bill. And therefore, once the content is ready, it's only then that I'll be able to take a decision.
Do you fear that if it wouldn't be a financial bill, I'm just talking about the possibility if it wouldn't, could you face a backlash in the council at the states level from the main opposition? Well,
I think our effort has to be to make sure that these are prepared, these are decisions taken by a consensus. The council will have to prepare a bill. And I have waited for a very long time as far as the constitution amendment is concerned, because I believed that the consensus approach was better than the sheer numbers approach.
Can I ask you an uncomfortable question? because the Congress was not coming on board and the demands were rather sticky and could have perhaps been tided over, did the thought of putting it to vote ever cross your mind, or did you want to build a consensus?
It did cross my mind. We had the numbers,
Exactly.
but it was not a preferred option.
Why would you say that?
Not a preferred option because
an earlier GST would have benefited you more.
GST has to be implemented in every state. And every political party is in power somewhere or the other. The Congress is a major political party in this country,
Right.
which is in power in several states in the country. And therefore, since they have to be also a part of the implementing instrumentalities through their governments,
True.
it's only in the fitness of things that they are also on board.
So GST was this one big tick in the box that foreign investors were waiting for. I know every visit that you made overseas, you were asked when will the GST be through, and I think you can proudly tell them today that we've made a beginning. Do you believe this is going to turn sentiment as far as India is concerned?
Well, if you look at the last 3-4 months, notwithstanding the fact that we are still growing at a very reasonable rate,
True.
much better than the rest of the world. You've had Aadhaar, you've had bankruptcy, you'll now have the GST, and all this has happened in the course of the last 3 to 4 months.
That's right.
So these are all big ticket items independently themselves. And I think the Indian reform story has its own script. And therefore, what do we do next? It's not merely legislation. I have some legislations in the pipeline. I think there are 2 or 3 issues which used to confront us. In the past, corruption was a big issue.
That's
I think we put it behind us. Ease of doing business was a big issue. That's good work in progress.
Up, yeah.
Opening out in various sectors was a good issue. How do you allocate resources was an important issue. Taxation was a big issue. We are trying to make it more reasonable. And I think as I look at where the things stand, people still ask questions about the health of the public sector banks.
That's also work in progress.
Stalled projects. And I think these are important areas now to concentrate on. Even though on both of them there is good work in progress.
And I know that they are top of your mind. Is Indian industry ready to embrace the GST? I know a lot of work has happened at the government level as far as IT infrastructure and all of that is concerned.
I would say so. You see, Indian industry has passed through a somewhat difficult time. It's not been at its very best.
That's right.
Given the banking situation, given slowdown in certain sectors, creating NPAs, low global demand. So they've had their own challenging moments. And I think as we get out of that phase, the killer instinct in the Indian industry has to come back. And once it gets back, I'm quite certain an easier taxation system is better for the Indian industry.
And it's reforms like this that will perhaps bridge that confidence to come back. A quick question on exemptions. The lesser the exemptions, the lower the standard rate can be. Is it easy to convince states or stakeholders to reduce those exemptions?
Well,
you're trying to do that with the direct tax and kudos to you.
I wouldn't like to comment on this stage because we'd like a lot of comments on this, particularly the smaller sectors of the economy, the SMEs and others who are adversely impacted, the micro industries, etc. And therefore, it's only after looking at the big picture that we'll take a final view.
I have a quick last question to ask of you, actually just very two. I'm going to seek your indulgence here. When do you see the benefits of the GST begin to kick in? It isn't a magic wand as people have made it out to be. When do you see the benefits
I think the benefits in terms of business confidence, the benefit in terms of India's image, the benefit in terms of investor confidence has already begun.
Exactly.
It's already begun.
The narrative is far more positive.
The narrative is far more positive. And I think once the GST is implemented, you could have some teething issues for the first few months. But after that, I think the situation would settle down fairly well.
So my last question to you, a lot of people believe that the principal opposition and the ruling party have been able to set aside political differences and pass a reform like this. So competitive politics finally made way for a game-changing reform.
I think
is this the beginning of the legislative logjam, that political acrimony ending? Or are we jumping the gun?
No, I think there will be issues of differences, but as I said on that day, this is where the maturity of Indian politics is evident, that when it's required Political parties across the divide come together. This is also Indian federalism at its best, because all states get together, all political parties get together. I hope we see more of these days.
And the term that you use, pooled sovereignty. Thank you very much for speaking to us. A pleasure.
Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/ETNow and don't forget to click the like button. You can also follow us on Twitter at ETNowLive. To stay updated with all our programming, hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel by logging on to youtube.com/user/ETNow.